Today's gospel reading portrays for us a very remarkable scene. How Jesus comes to the area of Lake Gennesaret, and he sees this man possessed by many devils. And these devils moved him to do horrible things. So horrible that the people in the town expelled him from the city. He was chained, he was bound, he was naked. He was cast out into the cemetery and into the wilderness. The people would have nothing to do with him because the devil moved him to do horrible things. And Jesus heals him. He casts out the devils. And the devils didn't want to be tormented and sent back to hell, but asked that they be sent into the herd of swine. And when they entered the swine, even the swine could not bear this. And the devils moved them to destruction, ran off the cliff into the waters, and perished. The man who was possessed was of right mind, healthy and whole. The people were fearful. They lost their livelihood. And they never seen such things before. And they asked Jesus, the Messiah, to leave them. On many levels, many things that happened in this gospel reading are remarkable. The power of God exhibited in freeing this poor man, seeing this poor man moved by many devils, seeing the devils destroy the swine, and then seeing the people dispel Jesus. In many ways remarkable. And for us, brothers and sisters, we sing this reading, we hear this reading, and we are reminded how sin moves people. Granted, we may not be possessed by devils, but we are certainly affected by sin. Sin moves us to do things we regret. In today's epistle reading, St. Paul shares with us a profound truth. At the end of the reading, he says, "It is no longer I who lives, but Christ in me." Here, St. Paul sat in prison for many years, suffered shipwrecks, and hunger and thirst and cold and oppressive heat, and the exhaustion of many travels, persecution, imprisonments, beatings. And he says, "It is no longer I who lives, but Christ in me." St. John Chrysostom, in offering understanding of today's epistle reading, those words, "It is no longer I who lives, but Christ in me," St. John says, the first half of St. Paul's words, "It is no longer I who lives." St. John Chrysostom says this refers to baptism. Because when we are baptized, we die. St. Paul talks about this in the Romans, how we die to sin and live to God. That it is no longer I who lives. It is no longer I, my sinfulness. It is no longer I, my attachment to evil. It is no longer I, my imprisonment to the flesh and its desires. Because in baptism, Christ releases us from all of this imprisonment. And then the second half of that, when he says, "It is Christ who lives in me." St. John Chrysostom offers us an understanding to see these words, meaning that we are to live and act that is pleasing to God. It is God's grace who dwells in our hearts. It is God's grace which softens our hearts and enlightens our minds and moves our souls to do things. When we are baptized, we are released from evil and sin and clothed with the garment of God's grace. And with that grace, we are moved to do good things. And St. Paul, further on in the epistle to the Galatians, says the fruit of the Spirit, the fruit of how God moves us, is love and joy and long-suffering and perseverance and humility and forgiveness. That when we see these virtues in someone's life, we see God's grace moving them to do good. We see the opposite in today's gospel reading, how the devil moves people. Moves people to do destructive things. Moves people to dispel God himself. So hearing today's readings, we ask ourselves and examine our conscience and ask, what moves me? What moves me in life? What, if anything, has hold of me? Any sin? Any anger? Any pride? Any attachment to earthly pleasures? Any enslavement to physical joys? Or are we moved to do sacrificial things of love and forgiveness and mercy and kindness and joy? What moves me? Brothers and sisters, we should always ask this question to ourselves, not just today's readings, but every time when we examine our conscience and we prepare to come to confession. What moves me? What have I done? How have I moved these last few days, these last few weeks, or if it's been a long time since confession, these last few months, or even years? What moves me? And what I do, is it pleasing to God? So let us, brothers and sisters, always strive to live with a clear conscience. And when we feel any kind of temptation or sin trying to take hold of us, let us call upon God for strength so that he may release us. It was only God who was able to save this man possessed by devils. And it is only by God's grace that we are cleansed from sins. It is only by God's grace that we are able to do good. Christ says, without me, you can do nothing. This all makes sense when we read these words combined with St. Paul when he says, it is no longer I who lives, but Christ in me. So let us, brothers and sisters, strive to live the words of St. Paul. It is no longer I. It is no longer my pride. It is no longer my will. No longer my selfishness. No longer my anger, my resentment, my attachments, my sinfulness. But it is Christ who lives in me. And to get to that point, to say these words, we pray fervently. We come to church. We partake of the holy mysteries. We fast. We change our life, little by little. When we are usually quick to anger, we bite our tongue. When we are usually slow to forgive, we forgive. When we are always giving in to temptations of food and drink and sex, we abstain. When we want to pursue various sinful actions, we stop it with the Jesus prayer. Whenever sinful thoughts come to mind, we battle them with the prayer. And little by little, we die. We die to sin. We die to our bad habits. We die to the things that have moved us in the past, so that we open our hearts for God's grace to move us, so that we do things well-pleasing to Him. Let us constantly ask ourselves, what moves me? And God, give me strength, give me faith, give me thy grace, so that I can live the words of St. Paul. It is no longer I who lives, but Christ. Christ lives in me. Amen.